We did this video last year, so let's keep that tradition going. We're just about 1 month into the NBA season, and I want to go through 10 things that we've learned to this point in the season. Should be tons of fun. Of course, if you enjoyed, drop a like, subscribe. On the road to 6,000, so thank you guys for 5K. That's our first big milestone. Now we're on the road to 10K, but let's get to 6K first, and of course we can't get there without you guys, so thank you for all your support. The first thing we've learned this season is that this has the argument and the chance to be the Timberwolves' best team of all time in franchise history. And before you run to the comments, let me explain. After season where Karl-Anthony Towns and Rudy Gobert, they just looked like an awkward fit. The two have seemed to hit their stride together, and they're playing their best basketball as a duo in that, of course, front court. But Rudy Gobert looks back to being the three-time depoy that we know he can be, and Karl-Anthony Towns has been more physical this year. Consistently is a good way to put it, and he's improved much greatly on the perimeter. Is also a big plus to why this front court has been so dominant. But we have to mention the team's unsung hero in Jaden McDaniels, as again he's been the lockdown perimeter defender for this team, and to me he might be the X factor when it comes to playoff time and the playoff success of this unit. But all of this has resulted in a top 3 defense, top 1 in defensive rating. So, of course, that always helps. But then there's Ant-Man. Then there's your superstar, Anthony Edwards, a guy that's been compared to Michael Jordan. And some would have the conspiracy theory that he is Michael Jordan's kid. Regardless, this is a guy that has made that leap to superstardom, averaging 26, 6, and 5, while also using the length that he has to be impactful on the defensive side, as well as carrying that offensive load. This team's 11-4. They're on top of the Western Conference, and to me, they're the biggest surprise in the league because I didn't see anybody putting them over a 5 seed in the Western Conference prior to the season, myself included. But they've definitely been the biggest surprise this so far this season. But then I want to ask you guys, right now they're on pace to tie the record of the 03-04 Kevin Garnett MVP-led Minnesota Timberwolves team. So I want to ask you guys this. Can this Timberwolves team, record-wise, be the best team ever? Or at least talent-wise, do you think this team is already there? Of course, I'm always interested in your opinion, so let me know down in the comments. Would you prefer this Timberwolves team or the 03-04 team led by Kevin Garnett? The second thing we learned is that the Pacers are running the modern-day version of the 7 seconds or less Phoenix Suns offense, or Mike D'Antoni offense, however you want to put it. But for Tyrese Haliburton, this is a guy that's averaging a league-leading 12.5, 13 assists a game, just around there. But he's also getting his. He's also averaging 25.5 points or so while shooting 50, 40, 90 from the field. He's putting up numbers that have never been seen before. Of course, it's a small sample size, only about 15 to 20 games. So it's probably not going to withstand the rest of the season. But he's still been the engine for the league's best offense, right? And another legend that did that in many ways and did so in a very similar offensive scheme, leading his team deep into the playoffs, winning MVPs, is, of course, Steve Nash. And this is a guy that from 04 to 06 with Steve Nash and Mike D'Antoni, and that duo revolutionized offense as we know it. They ran this 7 seconds or less style of offense, and it can be dangerous. You're going to put up a lot of points. You might give up a lot of points, but you're going to put up a lot of points, and nobody is going to want to get up to play you just with how fast you have to play. But to me, it just doesn't. A system like that doesn't work without that elite point guard at the helm. Steve Nash, of course, was elite, and they ran that offense to perfection. And then Tyrese Haliburton, I think he's getting to that point where he is an elite point guard, if he's not already. And, of course, this system would not work without him. But Tyrese Haliburton's impersonation of Steve Nash in that offense has this Pacers team as the most must-see offense in the game of basketball, as they have the best offensive rating, as they're putting up about 123 points per 100 possessions. That is nearly 9 points more than the league average, far and away in the number 1 spot. So beyond Tyrese Haliburton, there's also 7 players on this unit in this offense that are at least in double digits to this point in the scoring department. And as a team, Indiana's shooting nearly 40% from 3, as well as 50% from the mid-range. Absolutely insane numbers, and it's not possible, again, without that elite point guard at the helm. But now, just like Steve Nash and this style of offense, I do worry about them when it comes to a 7-game, slowed-down playoff series. However, for right now, it's very fun to watch, and Tyrese Haliburton, Again, he looks like an all NBA point guard. We've talked about some good things here so far into the NBA season. But on the flip side, we have to shed light on the Chicago Bulls and the disaster that they've been. To me, the third thing we've learned is that they need to blow it up, and sooner rather than later, as this comes as no surprise to the daily NBA fan. But if you're a casual fan, I mean, you might be saying, hey, this is a core that was the number 1 seed just 2 years ago for a long stretch of time. But a lot has changed since then, most notably the injuries to Lonzo Ball, and he was really the catalyst behind this offense, and he would get everyone in the right spots, and he was also great on the defensive side of the ball. And I guess, his value is really showing now that this team has struggled the way they have without him. But regardless, we're here today, and obviously this core is not working, whether due to injuries or whatever the case may be. And obviously the morale is not great within the superstars, as of course they lost their first game of the season, and they're already having players-only meetings. So if you're Chicago, to me, I think you move off of these aging stars and role players now, so when the deadline comes around, you don't give the other teams the leverage, right? Because they know you're desperate to get off of them. You can get more from these players now, in my opinion, than waiting a couple months to, for the deadline when teams, again, know you're trying to get rid of them. To me, you have 4 pieces at minimum that other teams would at least generate buzz around the league. You have, of course, Zach LaVine, DeMar DeRozan. You have Alex Caruso, which might generate the most buzz just due to his play style. And then Nikola Vucevic, maybe even a Patrick Williams, maybe even a Kobe White. You have a lot of pieces on this team that you can move for draft capital now, and use the rest of the season to develop whatever young stars or young talent you get back in return, and to find your next group of guys now instead of waiting to the trade deadline, because this current group has a low ceiling. To me, that their highest can be a 6th seed in the Eastern Conference, and then if everything has gone perfectly. So right now, just move off of them, start fresh, because obviously you need to change the chapter in Chicago. Do it now. Don't wait a month and a half. I have a bonus question for y'all. Let me know down below in the comments, was this trade worth it, or do you think this trade has worked for both sides? I can see both sides, but just to play devil's advocate here, I'm talking about the trade between the Wizards and the Golden State Warriors. Jordan Poole, of course, was with the Warriors when they won a championship, and he grew into a star, and there was talks that he would take over for Stephen Curry one day as the leader of Golden State. That, of course, did not work out. He was traded to Washington this offseason, and in return, of course, due to some trades that also happened with Washington, Chris Paul found his way to Golden State. Chris Paul has, found a decent role in this offense, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But for Jordan Poole, some teams are already, the front office is already talking about trading him even after just acquiring him. They're talking about already moving on from him at the midseason mark. But let me know. I could see both sides of it. One side is very young, one side is very old. Let me know down in the comments, do you think the trade was worth it, and do you think it has worked to this point in the season? The next thing we learned is that it's going to be another year where we have to argue about the true definition of what an NBA rookie is. And of course, let me explain. But for those that are confused, if an NBA rookie suffers a season-ending injury, whether if it's in the offseason or in the preseason, the NBA will grant that player another rookie season in their second year. And again, the problem with that, however, I'll say this. The problem with that, however, is that new rookie in his second rookie year has now had a full year with NBA trainers, dietitians, and overall some of the best trainers in the world. So then the next class of actual NBA rookies, they're forced to compete with that. If you need an example, let's take it back to 2016 or 2017, whatever year that was, when Ben Simmons was in his technical second year and he was competing against an actual rookie in Donovan Mitchell. Ben was in his second year. He was classified as a rookie because of a season-ending injury the year before, and he ended up winning the award over Donovan Mitchell, and of course they had their own drama and beef going on throughout the season, and Donovan Mitchell was wearing a hoodie with the definition of a rookie on it. Of course, that was some good times. It feels like forever ago, but regardless, we have that same exact situation this year with Victor Wembanyama, the global sensation, and the second-year technical rookie in Chet Holmgren. As although Wemby has, he hasn't been everything we've expected to this point, he's still been a very good rookie. However, he's had to compete against an NBA experienced Chet Holmgren. And, it's just, to me, at the end of the day, this doesn't affect me at all, and I'm not a Spurs fan, I'm not a Thunder fan, and these players are both going to go on to have amazing careers, whether if they win this award or not. But I do believe that NBA rookies should be they should be first year only. I know injuries are part of the game and they suck. Nobody likes injuries. However, they are part of the game, right? If they want to, keep players from load managing to avoid injuries, they have to hold that standards as far as awards at the end of the season. So to me, even though a player gets hurt in their first year, it is unfortunate, but to me, they shouldn't be classified as a rookie their next NBA season. So basically what I'm getting at is I think Victor Wembanyama is not going to win this award, but he should. And at least that's my opinion. As Chet Holmgren, he's playing a valuable role on a good team. He's going to get this award if he stays healthy. But to me, it should always go to the technical first-year rookie that is making his first couple steps, these baby steps in the NBA land. But next up, let's go to a team that to me is worse than advertised. I thought this team had the potential to be a potential play-in team in the Detroit Pistons. You see it on the top left of your screen. They're 3-14. They've lost they're 14th in the East, and they've lost 13 straight games. They just lost a game to the 15th seed in the Washington Wizards last night. To me, it looks like Monty Williams, he regrets taking that money, and we'll talk about that in a second. But starting with the team, they're 3-14, like I mentioned, bottom of the East. They've lost 13 straight games. It's just not what I expected to see out of this young group, with Monty as a veteran head coach that's won a good amount in the NBA taking over. As I expected this team again to be in the play-in race and maybe even make some noise for the playoffs like the Orlando Magic are this season. To me, they have the pieces. They have Cade Cunningham, Jaden Ivey, Jalen Duren, and some other young and valuable pieces. Of course, you need to get Killian Hayes on the bench. I don't know why he's still getting valuable minutes on an NBA team. To me, I can't exactly pinpoint outside of Killian Hayes why this team is this bad, as it could be their youth and inexperience, or it could just be the fact that their head coach doesn't really want to be there. At least that's what it looks like on a nightly basis, as Monty he was surprisingly fired from the winning situation there in Phoenix, and he was expected to join a broadcasting company. We heard the reports that immediately after the season, he rejected the Detroit Pistons offer, and he was expected to join a TNT or CBS, whatever the case may be. But then he eventually did take the job in Detroit for more money, even after saying if he were to take a job, it would be in a win-now situation. Detroit, of course, was in a rebuilding phase. Whatever the case may be, it's just not good in Detroit right now. And however it has to happen, they have to start winning basketball games. So if that is, cutting ties with Monty Williams, even if you don't want to, because he's guaranteed that money anyway, or if it's, trading for some veteran pieces. I know they're missing Bojan Bogdanovic right now, but Bojan Bogdanovic is not the reason they're 3-14 and not, let's say, 500 at the moment. So I don't know what it is. If they need more veterans or they just need another year to suck. But it feels like they've done that for way too long, and Monty was supposed to change that. That, of course, has not happened. But let's go over to an experienced team. We went from maybe the youngest team in ball to the oldest. I think the Lakers might have that crown regardless. Let's dive into the Golden State Warriors. As to another thing we've learned is that the Warriors dynasty and their championship run after championship run, that era might finally be over. But to me, they can fix it very easily, as it's hard to count out this Warriors unit entirely because they are just 2 years removed away from winning their most recent NBA title. But as of right now, Draymond's currently suspended. He's clearly lost a step. Not to mention, Steph has had some nagging injuries this season, and Klay Thompson has been more streaky than we've ever seen him be in his career. There's talks right now if he even could get moved to the bench. But we mentioned it earlier with the CP3 trade, But he's been an okay fit so far. However, the Warriors just don't have enough scoring depth behind Stephen Curry for this team to make it far in the playoffs, in my opinion. I think they're just far too reliant on a 35, 36-year-old Steph Curry. And don't get me wrong, he's playing maybe his best basketball of his career. However, are you going to really rely on Steph Curry as one man to drop 35, 40 points a night just to compete at a high level? It's just not realistic. And I know he's unlike any other player, where he can get hot and quicker than any other player. He's so deadly from the three-point line. Of course, the greatest shooter to ever be a human on this earth and touch a basketball. However, it's just a lot to ask from one human being, especially when he's not getting help from the supporting cast. So all things considered, I think if they can fill out this depth, maybe get another scorer behind Stephen Curry, there's a couple people at the deadline, like maybe if they want to bring in a DeMar DeRozan on the cheap. I know that's not the greatest fit, or maybe we've seen crazier things happen. Maybe Zach LaVine can find his way to Golden State on a cheap deal if Chicago decides to wait. However, they have to do it. I think there's just too many factors working against them if they can't get some scoring depth behind Stephen Curry. To me, for them to be a title contender this season, I think they're still going to be competitive. They are the Golden State Warriors, and they have Steph Curry, but they're just far too reliant on him, is what I've learned so far in the season. Still 10th in the West, though. They're still, again, going to be a competitive team. But then moving over, we've learned, we now have clarity, I'll say that. It was never the system in Memphis. It was the success of this team has always mostly been because of Ja Morant, and let me explain. As over the last couple of years when Ja Morant was out, this team, just with the supporting cast and the coaching, they've won a lot of the games, the majority of the time, and they've even had some playoff wins along the way. Of course, whether Ja Morant was hurt or suspended for a couple games, whatever the case may be, this team has won without Ja Morant a decent amount of the time. It was gotten to a point where some fans and analysts would argue that the reason that the team's success as of these last couple of years was more so because of their head coach and their system and their supporting cast with Taylor Jenkins and Jaren Jackson Jr. and the rest of the guys there in Memphis. And it was more so because of that than their superstar Ja Morant. As we've seen to start the year, I think we can put that foolishness to rest as they're 3-12, bottom 10 in defense, borderline top 10 or borderline bottom 10 in offense and defense is what I'm getting at here. So we still have to wait about 10 more games for Ja Morant to return. I'm just saying they've dug themselves into a pretty big hole, and I don't even know if Ja, when he comes back, can dig them out of this hole. But I know they've had some injuries on top of losing their superstar in Ja Morant. But to me, it's just the fashion in which they're losing these games this season, showing no fight, showing no grit and grind like we know the Grizzlies, that is their motto, at least for many, many years. It just tells me everything I need to know. I mean, Ja's a special player. He's a top 5 point guard in the league, top 20, 25 player, and we're all waiting on him to return. Of course, he's a human highlight reel. I just thought it was always a silly argument when people would say that this team could survive without Ja Morant and say that, that it was more so because of the system and their head coaching than the actual superstar in Ja Morant. And that's coming from a non-Ja Morant fanatic. I guess, he's kind of in the middle for me, but I think we have clarity. It is definitely their superstar for the reason that they've been so dominant and not their supporting cast and not because of their system. We can't wait for Ja Morant to return. Just don't bring any guns to the NBA basketball court. But next up, we've learned that the Rockets, one, are a playoff-level team, and two, Alperen Sengun is next up. And we'll talk about that here in a second, but for a team and an organization that has won just 25% of its games over the last 3 seasons, this is refreshing. This is a good start to the season for Rockets fans, as Ime Udoka has done wonders for this team, and it all started with the questionable signings at the time of Fred VanVleet and Dillon Brooks, because they got a lot of money for role players, it seemed like. But since then, this is a team that has picked up quality wins over teams like the Nuggets, Lakers. They were in that game with the Warriors until the very end. And of course, they've also beat the star-studded Pelicans. They're currently 8-6, 8th in the Western Conference. A lot of this early season success can be scrapped up to 2 things in my book, though. They have the number 1 defense, so shout out to Ime Udoka, immediate impact on his part. But then the second thing is that Sengun is turning into that next big star, as Ime switched this offense over when he first came over. In the first couple games of the Rockets season, it was, the same as last year. It was Jalen Green and Jabari Smith, and these 2 young stars carrying the offensive load. But then he quickly made a change when this team could not operate at a high level offensively. They ended up going through their star big man in Alperen Sengun. This is a guy that has averaged 29-6 to start the year. He really plays like a mini Nikola Jokic, which is really fun to watch. He's a 7-foot center that brings the ball up the court, and he just operates an offense like a point guard, but in a 7-footer's body. So Alperen Sengun, to me, has been one of the biggest keys for why the Rockets are relevant this season. And I'm not saying they will, but with how scrappy this team plays, how gritty this team plays, and with the veteran coaching of Ime Udoka, I wouldn't be shocked if this team made the playoffs at this point in the season. But next up, the next thing we learned is that it might be a fun trade deadline, and we talk about it every single season. And every single season, we get nothing really but, I guess, role players shifting from team to team, maybe some draft capital. But right now, we have a lot of names to watch as far as, could they be moved at the trade deadline? And we'll start here with the Chicago Bulls as Zach LaVine, DeMar DeRozan, of course, Alex Caruso, Nikola Vucevic, and we talked about the other role players on that team. A lot can shake up there in Chicago this season, and we talked about that earlier. A lot of these guys are disgruntled, and this team is obviously not in a good spot morale-wise, but I think they have a lot of pieces that can help contending teams, and hopefully this is a sell deadline for the Chicago Bulls. For the Toronto Raptors, though, you have guys like Pascal Siakam and OG Anunoby, maybe the two biggest, the targets for these contending teams. But the blueprint has been clear this season for me for the Toronto Raptors, as this is now Scottie Barnes' team. And that doesn't mean that Pascal hasn't been good or OG hasn't been good. This team has just focused more so to giving Scottie the ball and letting him develop and grow into their next star. And these two guys, OG Anunoby and Pascal Siakam, they're not getting any older. They're not getting any younger is a good way to put it. As OG Anunoby, he's not old by any stretch of the means, but he definitely carries a lot more trade value. I think probably at this point, due to the play style and less ball dominance, I think he probably carries the most trade value on this team over a guy like Pascal Siakam. So to me, if this team wants to commit to Scottie Barnes, this could bring in the most capital. As we saw at the deadline last year, teams were willing to give up 3-4 first-round picks for OG Anunoby, and they turned it down. But then for Pascal Siakam, he's older. He's ready to win now. You can also trade him to a team like the Kings or some other contending team, maybe like the New York Knicks. However, the trade package would have to go, right? But Pascal Siakam is another guy that he seems like a Toronto for lifer. But who knows? We've seen a lot of stars. They want out and they want in winning situations to end their career. Pascal probably only has 2 or 3 years left at this level of play. So, I wouldn't be shocked if he wants out at the deadline. So, again, some good pieces there for Toronto, some good pieces for Chicago, but some two other names I just want to throw out there on the West Coast. We have a guy like Jeremy Grant, who got a huge contract extension this offseason under the assumption Damian Lillard was going to be back as a Blazer, but he's been playing up to his contract despite Dame not being there, and he's still a two-way player that can help a variety of different teams, and I think teams can look past his contract if he's playing at the level that he currently is for, of course, the remainder of the season. And then Malcolm Brogdon, to me, he's a veteran point guard, and he just doesn't fit the timeline there in Portland. So I think you get a half season out of him. You let the young guards that you have currently learn and develop under Malcolm Brogdon, and I think you trade him at the deadline. Maybe you can get a late first or a couple seconds or a young player in return for Malcolm Brogdon. And he can help pretty much any contending team. As a Cavs fan, I'd love to have Malcolm Brogdon run the second unit. But again, he just doesn't fit with the timeline, and he would definitely fit better in a contending situation. Honestly, I wouldn't be shocked if he ends up back in Boston or someplace like that. But then the last thing that we've learned is that parity has remained. We no longer have these super teams. Of course, the Phoenix Suns are an exception, but we don't have these teams that are just so star-studded and they're so far and away better than every other team that we're just like, we know it's going to be the Warriors and Cavs for the 4th straight year. We don't have that anymore, and parity is a beautiful thing in my eyes, and 20 out of the 30 teams remaining are 500 or better. I think it might even be 21 now after last night's games, and tonight with the in-season tournament games, we might even have more teams over that 500 mark. So there's a lot of teams as of right now, 15 games or so into the season, that they're 500 or better. It's just a beautiful thing because you're not, okay, the Cavs, that's my team. Okay, the Cavs are playing the Brooklyn Nets. That's not a game that, I can just turn off anymore. That's a game that I have to tune into because we might win or we might lose that game. Same thing with a lot of other teams in the NBA. And there's a lot of teams that are, below 500 that are better than what they're playing like the Golden State Warriors, like the Memphis Grizzlies when fully healthy, and some other teams along that line. But parity is such a beautiful thing, and we have that yet again in 2024. But that's going to do it here for today's video. Drop a comment down below. What have you learned so far this NBA season? And do you think any of these are crazy? Do you agree with any of the things I've had to say? Of course, I'd love to talk to you guys about it. I think some of the most interesting ones are like the Chicago Bulls situation. You have the Minnesota Timberwolves, as they might be the best Timberwolves team of all time. And, why not? Before we get out of here, let's run through my things just so you guys aren't confused. The first thing that we've learned to me is that this might be the best Timberwolves team of all time, that the Indiana Pacers and Tyrese Halliburton are impersonating the '06 Phoenix Suns 7 seconds or less offense. We have that the Chicago Bulls need to blow it up. We have the definition, please, where we need to find out the true definition of what an NBA rookie is and who should classify for the award. I think we learned that we're going to be arguing about that yet again this season. We know that the Detroit Pistons are worse than expected. The Golden State Warriors, their dynasty might be over. And then we learned that it's Ja Morant. That's the reason for this team's success as of the last couple of years, not because of their system. Sengun is next up, and the Rockets are a playoff-level contending team. And it should be a fun trade deadline, but of course we never know at this point. And then, of course, we just talked about it. Parody has remained in the NBA. But that is going to do it for today's show officially. Later on today, just given that the fantasy football playoffs are coming up, I'm going to be releasing 2 videos on Tuesday and Thursday for the next couple of weeks. So be on the lookout for that. One of them is going to be at 1 o'clock, and one of them is going to be a little bit later, maybe around the 4 or 5 o'clock range, just to give you guys some time in between the videos. But until tomorrow, or I guess until tonight, for the fantasy football video, stay happy, stay healthy, help us get to 6K, and I'm out of here.